On May the 25th, 1965, workers and guests were able to celebrate the completion of the first building phase within the shelter of the already fully assembled roof. Not only the roof, but also the building complex beneath it was assembled on site from elements specially prefabricated for the purpose. The supporting structure is a lattice work calculated on the human scale of measurement and designated by Le Corbusier as modular. Steel struts made of 3 mm thick steel form hollow lattice cubes 2.26 meters square. Walls, windows, floors and ceilings were installed in the finished steel structure. Over 25,000 bolts were used. While the steel structure was taking shape on site, the floor plates were being welded together in the factory. The longitudinal and transverse ribs provide reinforcement. Each lattice cube supports a floor plate. Since steel and glass predominate in this construction, the main problems were those of insulation. The facade was faced with enamel plates arranged in a definite color rhythm prescribed by Le Corbusier. July 15th, 1967. Le Corbusier's Centre is finished. lectures, exhibitions and discussions held in this house will serve to promote Le Corbusier's work and ideas. Some of Le Corbusier's fundamental ideas were realized in his last building.
Good evening. Welcome to the Architectural Association. It's nice to see not only people from the school, but a lot from the outside. I'm really excited to introduce Naïma Jornod, who's going to speak today about the Heidi Weber Museum. I'm also very excited to announce that Heidi Weber is actually here, so she will be able to hopefully answer some of the questions, not all, later, afterwards, if that's okay. I think it's a really special event. I mean, sort of in the line of some of the events that have happened in the past, where we actually invite the client in to come and talk about the work, not only the architect, or in this case, somebody who's closely related to the client or kind of work close with them. We kind of know that it takes a great client to make a great building. I don't think it's always up to the architect. And I think in this case it is kind of double true, not only because of the kind of great oeuvre that Corbusier has left for us, but also because it's probably one of the only buildings that somehow houses itself. So it kind of is a building for the art, or the other way around, I suppose. And the idea was around for a very long time of the kind of double umbrella or the kind of inverted umbrella, but it actually really took a great client to realize it. So I'm really excited, I guess, that both of you are here. And I hope that everything goes well. I think you're not used to speaking in English, so I think there's a bit of that, but I think we find that very charming, and we have a couple of backups in case there's some questions, but I'm sure it's going to go all right. So please join me in welcoming Naïma Jornod and Heidi Weber.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, let me thank the organizers of the AA Public Lectures for their invitation to talk about Le Corbusier. Before starting, I would like to present my apologies for my English. That is very poor and my bad pronunciation. 2 reasons why I prefer to read my conference. It is with a great honor, 51 years after Le Corbusier's visit to this prodigious vicinity, packed with history and the teachings of architecture, that I present you one of his most acclaimed works. Indeed, 51 years ago, on the 1st of April, 1953, Le Corbusier received from Queen Elizabeth the Royal Gold Medal for Architecture from the Royal Institute of British Architects. And in the evening, he were in this high-known school for a dinner given in his honor by eminent members of the AA. In the history of a life, opportunities arise that push us to inexplicable lands. They are encounters that generate the realization of unthinkable projects that are blissfully followed through, resulting in an outstanding accomplishment. Heidi Weber is without question part of this select world. By defending the works of the artist Le Corbusier for 55 years now until today, by building the Le Corbusier Museum in Zurich by Le Corbusier himself, as well as displaying his works, she has enabled us to apprehend, understand, and grasp the artist's genuine context. It is additionally with great pleasure that during this conference I will present you Heidi Weber's museum, known as the Heidi Weber Museum Center Le Corbusier, otherwise known as the Home of Man, an architecturally singular realization by Le Corbusier, to whom I have recently dedicated a monograph published by Slightkin Editions. During our first meeting with Heidi Weber in 2006 as commissioner of the retrospective exhibition, Le Corbusier or the Synthesis of Arts in Geneva, where I organized, along with the group of Art History Museum in Geneva, I was extremely moved when visiting the museum by how all the great principles of the great builders' architectural theory were reunited. The study of this building seemed indispensable for me. I remembered that Le Corbusier never stopped highlighting the importance of vision, not as a phenomena of retinal perception or emotional awareness, but rather as the phenomena of cognitive awareness. As he explained in his one of the latest texts, Mise au Point, first of all, must have scrutinized, seen, observed, only then can one separate sensations, perceptions, and ideas. I am a donkey, but with a sharp eye. We are dealing here with the eye of a donkey who has the capacity of feeling. I am a donkey with instinct for proportions. I am and remain an impenitent visual person. So, I am a donkey too, but with long ears, counter to him. With difficulties, I have tried to approach his capacity of feeling, not easy. So, to realize this study after having watched and observed as advised by him, I tried to respectively answer the, excuse me, this is the donkey who I am. With very difficulties, I tried to learn his architecture. So, I tried to respectively answer the simple questions of how and why. How should one approach this work? The reply was naturally found partly in the library abundant with Le Corbusier and on Le Corbusier, but also partly in the archives that I was lucky enough to consult, thanks to the kind input of Mrs. Heidi Weber and of Mr. Louis Fruté, who was the engineer of this project, and at last of the Le Corbusier Foundations in Paris. The second question involves the reading of the building as accurately as possible, but also the building's problematics, not forgetting the understanding of the architect's intentions. We have been lucky enough to answer these questions thanks to the archives, but above all thanks to the living memories incarnated by Heidi Weber and Louis Fruté, both involved differently in the construction of this museum. This presentation covers three main points that we are going to develop: the history of the Heidi Weber's Museum, the presentation and the reading of the building, and lastly, we will finish on the point of the synthesis of art of Le Corbusier. To have architecture, do we have to have an architect? But for the architect to realize their architecture, do we also have to have a commander? It is thanks to the exchange and thrust between the two protagonists that the architectural language could evolve in a modernist prosperity. The bond between Le Corbusier and Heidi Weber is inscribed in this continuity and gave birth to the Heidi Weber Center Le Corbusier, or the home of man, the object of our subject. The 20th century put in place the basis of contemporary architecture using modern materials, and Le Corbusier, who we need not introduce, is at the very center of contemporary architecture as highlighted by the historian Siegfried Giedion. Indeed, beside his abundant works in all the domains, his theories and certain realizations have undeniably contributed to the rise of new architecture. Already in 1922, he suggested founding an architecture based on three principles: rationality, the economical usage of invested means, and functionalism. Moreover, he fights for carrying architecture forward to the future, especially in our day and age, where the human being must rediscover the sense of the harmony of nature. As for Mrs. Heidi Weber, nothing from the outset could have predicted the encounter with Le Corbusier, other than her passion for art and for the artistic world and her temerity. Thanks to her art and design gallery, one of the great groundbreaking galleries of Zurich at the end of the 50s. In parallel, her activity as a designer in the creation of numerous pieces of furniture, such as the sofa realized around 1958-59, Heidi Weber discovers a passion for the creative aspect of architecture. From her very first meeting with Le Corbusier in 1958, the exhibitions complementing the display of the works at the mezzanine gallery is established by tacit agreement. From then on, Heidi Weber deals with all the master's shape works, not only regarding the exhibitions and sale, but she also becomes the producer of his furniture and editor of all his engraved works and lithography. 56 years later, Heidi Weber continues her relentless promotion of Le Corbusier by organizing exhibitions in her museum, but also overseas, as well as publishing works on the artist. The 11th of April 1960, during Le Corbusier's stop-off in Zurich, Heidi Weber took him to Zuricon Park to announce, once arrived, that she hoped to have a museum built in that place. It is noteworthy that at that time, Heidi Weber owned no land, nor wealth to assure the construction. Only her belief in Le Corbusier and his intention made her more determined than any other fortune. The idea immediately appealed to the architect, as it meant housing his work in a designated area for the first time, and all this inside his own architecture, which would allow him to create his unity of arts, as he liked to say. This is how, in May 1960, on his return to Paris, Le Corbusier starts working on the new project and informs Heidi Weber of his agreement with the principal for the construction of the museum. Le Corbusier knew from the start what he wanted, as demonstrated in his first sketches of the building realized in July 1961, in which the architect has drawing and summarized all the main elements of the construction, namely an independent roof and the house consisting in prefabricated elements according to the modular and its patent. The Heidi Weber Museum Center Le Corbusier is not only one of the last constructions by Le Corbusier, started while he was still alive in 1964 and finished 2 years after his death in 1967. But it is especially presented as the synthesis of his architectural and artistic creations. It dwells 47 years after its realization as a pioneer of modern times. From the outset, the pavilion was conceived as an area for exhibitions. The idea was to show the public a prototype of residence by Le Corbusier, such as an apartment villa which combined exhibition halls. As you can see on this December 1961 plans, there is the residential space on your left and the exhibition area on your right. This project, the first, called the concrete project, consisted of a double umbrella steel roof independent from the main building, which was intended to be in concrete. The residential prototype intended by the architect at the start was transformed a short time later into an exhibition area for the artist's works without the apartment villa demonstrative part. It was no question of creating a museum in itself, but to build an exhibition pavilion with the objective of becoming a lively discussion area, extending area, entertained by its owner. From the beginning of 1962, Le Corbusier transforms the project into a metallic construction called the metal project. Here is the model. This is a building also with a roof formed like a double umbrella independent from the residence, this time composed of alveolar metallic modules with heights of 26 meters. Other than the change in the materials, metal instead of concrete, the project differs significantly from the first project in the layout and measurements. In the metal project, Le Corbusier adds an extra space of 2.26 meters in width between the two modules of the building, marked out on the plan below by two red lines of the slide. While the above plan corresponding to concrete, we notice that there is no space marked out between the two modules of the building. On this picture, the blue line marks out the two modules. The decision for this extension was made owing to the stairwell and slope cramping the space inside, which significantly transformed the architecture and the aesthetic of the layout of this building. The Heidi Weber Museum is remarkable through its singular architecture, but additionally because it comprised the essential themes developed throughout his life. A steel independent roof, an independent main building composed of alveolar volumes of 226, 226, 226 with a roof terrace, an exterior coated in colored enamel, and a kit construction, which means an industrial construction. Following extensive research, the roof, unique in his architectural work, is shaped like a double umbrella and floats freely above the main building. It rests on 6 columns, placed on the fringes that we can see drawn in black arrow on the right of the slide. It also rests on 2 rectangular-shaped central pillars, indicated here by a red arrow, which corresponds to the extensions between the 2 modules. The roof, like you see on the left of the slide, is composed of 2 square folded metal sheets separated by a rectangle. Each square is composed of 4 pieces on 2 slats and situated symmetrically and bent over each other. These squares are fashioned in a workshop on the picture above on the far left, transported in pieces welded on the ground, as we can see in the middle picture above, then put up at 9 meters high to be placed on top of the poles, as we can see in the picture in the middle. The main building is positioned on a basement of exposed concrete and is built independently from the roof. It consists of filigree cubes of 226 edges assembled with steel tubes, built in the factory below right and joined together on site. It is possible to enlarge the system of cubes as you like, as well noticed on the right of the plan above. The vertically and horizontal elements, walls, windows, ceiling, and flooring, are fixed to the framework. The steel framework is bolted together with 22,000 bolts below left. This way, the parietal divisions are freed from their static and carrier functions and are arranged at the choice of the residents, allowing more space and volume in a chosen area and less space in secondary spaces. These alveolar modules are conceived according to the patent 226 that Le Corbusier created in 1950 according to the modular standards. He thus realized an alveolar living volume. These volumes create free spaces full of resource. They could be freely used for residents. Let's come back to the roof for an instant. It is in September 1960, during their first meeting, that Le Corbusier, full of enthusiasm, explains his goal to the engineer Fruté and shows him photographs in a book of naval architecture taken on an aircraft carrier where sheet metal of the deck slant in different ways horizontally over the sea, saying, that's what I want to do. When comparing photographs of the ship decks in the middle and on the right of this slide to the roof plan, the 3 photos above, we observe that the dynamic result of the different slants of the deck of the aircraft carrier is procured by the plans of the slanted roof. This idea by Le Corbusier of the ship deck is brought up in his study notes where he writes, "Aesthetism, see photo of aircraft carrier USA." This type of inspiration is frequent in Le Corbusier, which justifies his axiom we talked about before. One should first have watched, seen, and observed. Thus, we can release our sensations, perceptions, and ideas. A further example illustrates the importance of observation and inspirations. It is found in the roof at the southeast angle of the Ranchon Chapelle, which was engendered after observation of the crab shell and the bow of a ship, the Normandy. As soon as one crosses the threshold of the museum, the visitor realizes the framework of the main building based out of cubes, also displayed in the inside, here on the right in this picture. If you wouldn't mind, we are going to go back in history and follow the creative process of the artist at the root of this admirable building. Indeed, if we consider the Heidi Weber Museum as Le Corbusier's last architectural testament, it's because the conception of his mental process magnificently summarized the different theoretical stages of his architecture, as Le Corbusier points out when explaining that the construction of this building has a long history of successive phases. Several dates mark the stages of the genesis of this center, and as you'll notice, the first goes back to 1907. For the roof, the premise of his architectural approach in terms of tokens for the building of the center is found from 1927 in the Nestlé pavilion, where the double slanted steel roof contains the beginnings of the roof we are interested in. Furthermore, this pavilion is the demonstrative of the standardization which the architect had been fighting for since 1914, and also because the building parts can be dismantled, like in Zurich Museum. In 1939, in Liège, we again find the stages of the umbrella parasol roof independent from the structure. It is only from 1950, with the pavilion of the Synthesis of Art exhibition in Porte-Maillot in Paris, that the idea really came together and the Heidi Weber Museum is inaugurated. In 1957, we find this idea once again in projects in museums for temporary exhibition in Tokyo and in Erlenbach, projects that were no built. The idea of the floating roof materialized, however, in Chandigarh, India, between 1952 and 1957, with a building destined for the City High Court. Nevertheless, the roof is not metal. And it is in 1960 that Le Corbusier, thanks to Heidi Weber, managed to make his idea concrete. With regard to the building, an important day, the first, 1907. This was when Le Corbusier becomes aware of the housing solution in the form of workmen's houses, a unique type which arose during his visit to the monk cells in Chartreuse-des-Mains in Tuscany. In 1914, he proposed a project, the Domino House, built where possibilities were found to dismantle the structure of the building, implying by this the desire to industrialize housing. This will be the starting point of his architectural research. In 1920, with the Citroën house, he proposed the idea of houses in series, hence the slightly altered word taken from the Citroën car. In 1925, in Paris, the pavilion de l'Esprit Nouveau demonstrates all these principles, which he announces in Stuttgart the following year in 1926 in a theory named the 5 points of new architecture, points that he would go on to use magnificently in several of his villas, most notably in his masterpiece, the Purist Villa, or the white villa called La Villa Savoie. Le Corbusier put his idea of metal structure constructions from the standards of the framework realized in a factory into practice in the building La Clarté in Geneva. In parallel, between 1928 and 1933, he works on 3 big projects for Moscow and Paris, where he proposed for the first time his large glass walls, called neutralizing walls. Only the Salvation Army Refuge in Paris implemented these large glass walls. I will finish this chapter by going back in time and bringing up the date 1911, the second important date. To get to the neutralizing walls, Le Corbusier uses large glass walls, but before that, the basis of the idea sprouted from lengthwise windows that most authors date around 1920-22. However, what is unpublished today that we found in the archives consulted the notion of lengthwise windows quoted by Le Corbusier in 1911, thus well before 1920. Following his return from the East in 1911, he moved into a loft that lacked light in a farm not far from the La Chaux-de-Fonds in Switzerland, and decided to create a supplementary lengthwise window, which is explained on the document on the right. The Home of Man, or Heidi Weber Museum, is found in Zurich Park, one of the most beautiful parks in Zurich, a privileged vicinity for the people of Zurich summer as in winter. With its unusual form and bright colors, the building nestles amongst the centenary trees in the park, and by its presence entertains the whole of the Zuricher environment. I invite you to take a little walk around the museum, where wise harmony reigns, regulated by the modulations of the modular. The straw is enriched with the architectony of volumes and colors, bringing out the poetic approach of Le Corbusier. I built this house in his honor, obviously to show his work, but also to act in his spirit for the public. This is how Heidi Weber explains on a stone at the entrance of the pavilion the reasoning behind her actions, and invites the visitor to come in and discover the works of Le Corbusier, who had become her friend. This museum, today well known and appreciated for its modern architecture, for the emotions it provokes in the visitor, and first sight it stands as a showcase demonstrative of modern architecture. Le Corbusier envisaged it as a shapely event in tune with the times, both in its forms and its space, filling the double functioning of a museum that displays and is on display. The building consists of 4 floors, the basement in reinforced concrete, the ground floor, the first floor, and the rooftop terrace. Beside the reinforced concrete on which the main structure is built, the 2 floors form a set consisting of 5 volumes of 1 level and a double high volume. It is difficult at first to work the surface space out precisely. Each part offers an adjustable space based on 226. It is the pillars and sometimes the partitions that allowed to the room. The volume change the dimension depending on the light and the color. The basement is furnished as a conference room where the benches and rows of seats were devised by the architect. It also acts as a large showroom. Spotlights are used to light the basement and are adjusted in light of the exhibition, but also bright days or skylights shine into the 2 east and south-facing terraces, which grant this hall with particularly interesting lighting. The ground floor the entrance hall connects the two modules between which the ramps and adjoining that link the different levels together. Facing the entrance, the reception which continues onto the kitchen, here is a view of the extremely modern reception hall, as well as the kitchen, which is a very poor still too. In opposite, on the west side, the large double-high hall colored the workshop, lit up by the red tunnel of the fireplace, with the indoor stairway by its side, which looks like a sculpture. The stairwell of 45 steps on 6 landings is an extremely poor style. Let's through the different levels from the basement to the terrace. The workshop is the only place that is separated from the other areas by a door. This majestic, solid oak door pivots on an axis of 90 degrees maximum. On the picture above, the door is open at its maximum, granting a prolonged perspective to the visitor's eyes. On the two pictures below, the second pivoting door leads to the terrace. On the first floor, there are two distinct spaces. The first space here is used as a reading room above and library below. The second room is used as a showroom. This room, bright and spacious, is adaptable depending on the exhibitions. A structure of modules is shaped on the steel rods. We can fix the walls to define the chosen space to suit the eventual exhibition and suit the commissioner. To get to the different floors, instead of the stairwell, we can use the concrete ramps. The ramp or slope is an element that Le Corbusier introduced very quickly into his architecture and generates great interest. He writes about this: raised on stilts, we move up obliviously by ramp, which is very different sensation to a stairwell formed out of steps. A stairwell separates one floor from another. A ramp links them. In the museum, the ramp's center of gravity are transplanted in the middle, north-facing, and placed on the axis of the plan. They are around it. Vertical and horizontal spatiality is hinged in opposite dynamics. There are a number of 3 ramps, 2 inside, landing us from the basement and the first floor, as we see here in the photograph, and 1 outdoors leading to the terrace. On a slight slope, the concrete ramp flanks air inlets on the right sides, enabling light and air to come through. Once on the rooftop, the light enables the visitor to enjoy a panoramic and telescopic view of 360, overlooking the park and beyond towards the lake. We can highlight the refined furnishing by the polychromy of facades that are also found on the roof, the pillars, and match the cushions. The outer closure elements are covered in slabs of enamel. The facade reflects a happy marriage between the steel sheets enameled with vibrant colors and the bay windows, interrupted by the fine vertical inlets, protected by a metal mesh that we can see below right. The disposition of the enamel slabs, all two-tone based on white, black, or bright colors, painted sometimes vertically and sometimes horizontally, following a rhythmical system which bestows a building through the game of nuance. Vertical and horizontal, a lively dynamic, like a remarkable sound, almost symphonic. Very briefly, a few words of the synthesis. Each piece of work can summarize the synthesis according to Le Corbusier as long as it involves not only space and time, but also poetry and harmony, as he expresses by saying, a work of art is worth everything or nothing. It's words, it's a speech, it's a voice, it imposes respect, attention. Le Corbusier assigns the same power to the painting, the sculpture, and architecture. These different ranges of arts result in the architectural construction of space and materials, transmitting sound waves or visual capable of touching us deeply, opening us towards their power of persuasion, towards other forms of expression, becoming the living synthesis of continual metamorphose. This reflects not only the importance awarded to shapes, but also their interactive influence towards other forms of artistic expression in accordance with what he said on this matter. I am a form acrobat, a creator of form, a player with form. Forms are a means of expression, all emotions of shape, the form, expression, and way of thinking. Here is an example illustrating the concept of his synthesis of arts in continual metamorphose. By observing the sketch of this painting, Le Corbusier found the proportion of its frame Alger's skyscraper. In 1960, thanks to Heidi Weber, the opportunity arises for him to realize something for which he had fought for his entire life, a building made up of light and proportions where arts are complemented by the same token, complementing the materials and current manufacturing and radiating the thought and the emotion. Architecture is in some occasions can satisfy one's tasks and increase the pleasure of man by an exceptional and magnificent collaboration with arts, painting, and statuary. In 1925, by exhibiting the pavilion de l'Esprit Nouveau, Le Corbusier expresses his idea of reforming modern dwellings. But it's in 1960 that the opportunity to put his architectural ideal schema of industrial housing into practice, thanks to the building of the Home of Man or Heidi Weber Museum, which embodies his words perfectly. The style of the 19th century, the reinforced concrete of 20th have transformed the art of building. A new architectural aesthetic is born. The building was conceived in such a way that the outside envelope is becoming a transmitter and a receiver. Also, its response to horizons translates the game of the countryside, reflecting the environment and nature in the glass or steel walls of the museum. This dynamic relation and interaction between inside and outside, the nature, environment, and dwellings entertains both the countryside and the house. In the inside, the visitor is immersed by the space and the light which fruitfully addresses and reaches toward the outside. The visitor is struck by the happy marriage between the volumes and the light, the steel and the wooden walls, and the furniture, generating the sensation of lightness, of warmth, and of happiness. The House of Man, or the museum, introduces itself like a language, a system, all the while formulating a thought, a spirit that speaks to us. The right balance established in the Heidi Weber Museum Center Le Corbusier, according to the modular, determines the emotion and poetry that is emitted and checking the assumption of the creator. Reaching harmony, which is infinitely precise, just, rings and consonant, which delights in the end each of us without us realizing, gets to the very depth of our sensitivity, which sharpens edges of emotions. The two cubic modules of the main building, realized on the basis of his 226 patent, presents as a reminiscence of the importance he attaches to the cube, representative of the Parthenon, from his first journey in the East in 1911. As he explains in his interpretation of his painting La Cheminée, which is here, where the cube represents the light. In conclusion, the Heidi Weber Museum exhibition place of his plastic and architectural works answers not only to the criteria of manufactured work, but also completely dismantlable abodes. Through its construction, Le Corbusier offers us his last architectural testament, finished after his death, totally respecting his plans. At this moment in time, considering the vast number of exhibitions realized and the great amount of visitors coming from all around the world to the museum, despite all the difficulties the owner has to overcome, we can, without doubt, confirm that Le Corbusier's goal was largely respected. The Heidi Weber Museum expresses a life journey, a revolutionary thought which exposes and is displayed like a synthesis of his art, leading the visitor to their own artistic background to stop, contemplate, dream, question, and imagine. Yes, Le Corbusier, through the building of the Heidi Weber Museum, has managed the fantastic challenge that was imposed from 1920 by elaborating the Citroën project, consisting of the building of prefabricated housing, where the possibilities and combinations offered architectural invention to all. The Heidi Weber Museum, the only building of all Le Corbusier's works, is presented as a double synthesis. On the one hand, conceptualizing the synthesis of arts, and on the other hand, manifesting the standardized house. In this way, the pavilion in Zurich incarnates the synthesis in itself by being displayed like a manifest. It is a manifest, and perhaps the living manifest of Le Corbusier. Lastly, when Socrates replies to Phèdre in Eupalinos, tell me, haven't you observed, while walking in this town, that between the buildings they are populated, some are mute, the others speak, and others, who are more seldom, sing. who are inclined to overlap on this point without ambiguity to the work of Le Corbusier and the Heidi Weber Museum that will certainly be a part of his works, that saying. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I want to present you the woman, Mrs. Heidi Weber, which spanned her life from the beginning when she encountered Le Corbusier, for Le Corbusier. And she has done many, many things.
Yes.
If you have some question, I would be pleased to answer your question.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful talk and the very enjoyable presentation and the little bits and everything. So if there's anything,
Fantastic.
any questions in the room?
Unbelievable.
Hi, thank you very much for the lecture. I wanted to ask a question. While the museum was built, during the design of the museum, at the same time he was asked to design another museum in Stockholm that wasn't lately built because they didn't have enough money to do it. But I was wondering, how did that part of design influenced on this museum?
I don't know.
The
question?
Theodor Arenberg Museum.
Yes?
How did this influence on the design of this one?
I don't hear right the question.
I don't.
No, we don't understand it.
How?
How did the Theodor Arenberg Museum, the design of that museum, influence this house? Or vice
Oh, that was the opposite. I think that the Arenberg Museum, Mr. Arenberg went after.
Arenberg?
Yeah, Arenberg. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes.
Yes, you can have-
When Le Corbusier, when Heidi Weber goes to Le Corbusier and asks him to do this museum, it's in 1960. So Arenberg, when he knows that Heidi Weber is in discussion with Le Corbusier for a museum, and Arenberg goes to Le Corbusier in 1961 in May for the first idea. He said to him, I want to have a museum. It's like one year after, you know, and after Le Corbusier say okay, and there is some problems, and in February 1962, for the problems, financial problem, they stopped the project.
Can I would like to
It's
say.
your question? It's like,
No.
yeah?
I was more
If you
asking about the
can
design.
speak slowly,
Yeah.
this is good for me.
I was more asking about the design of that he proposed for that museum.
It's the same design. The difference is for the museum, Arenberg Museum, it's longer. It's the same two cubic parts, you know. For the Heidi Weber Museum, it's 2 cubic, you know. It's alveolar cubic parts. There is 12 cube of 2 meters 26, cross 2 meters 26, 2 meters 26. 12. In Arenberg, the project of Arenberg, there is 14.
And it was not the roof independent, the roof was
There
fixed.
is the same. The
Very
roof
different. No,
independent.
it's not the same.
No,
The roof was closed. It
oui.
would not have been
Oui.
independent. You know, it was closed. It was not a free
Oui.
roof.
No.
And I have to say that Mr. Armbeck came in the gallery and he saw the model of the building exposed in my gallery. And then he went to Paris to talk to Corbusier, and Corbusier, I was a little bit surprised that he wanted to do the same right away, nearly the same in Stockholm, but I couldn't say nothing, it was his right. So one day he told to me, he said, Mrs. Weber, you know, Mr. Armberg, he came to me, and he would like to build also a museum. I said, yes, I know. Then he said, he's a nice man, no? I said, I don't find so much, anyway. But then he said, but Mrs. Weber, pay attention, you judge too quick. He's a very nice man. I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, the time will show. The time will show. I said nothing. So I went away, and the next time when I came, one day he said, you know what's happened in Sweden? Mr. Armberg has some problem. And I had to tell him that this was in my, otherwise I would have kept it here in my house. I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, I remember very well that you find him a nice man. He was shocked a little bit, but I had to do it after all what I went through, you know what I mean? And so he had problems of finances, he had problem, he was judged for jail in Sweden. He couldn't go back to Sweden, so he stayed 5 years in Switzerland. And how you know the Swiss always have a good solution when they go and wear the international law, because it was an international law that he couldn't go out, he would have been kept all over the world, you know? How do you say that in English? Anyway, and then the Swiss gave him, without residence, 5 years, he was able to buy a big villa in the Lake of Geneva with all the money, because it seems he smuggled money, you know, like today it's common to name, you know about these stories. At that time, he didn't know how much people were manipulating money around the world. So he had a villa in Gèvres, and he couldn't go out of Switzerland 5 years. And he came once and he said, oh, I cannot travel, I'm unhappy, I would like to travel. After 5 years, he could go. It was finished, the court case in Sweden. That's the story about Armberg, the true story. Okay.
Can you tell us, please, a little bit about Le Corbusier as a person? Like, who was he? You know, not as an architect, but as a person, because you were his friend, right?
Can you talk louder?
Okay.
What?
Not as an architect, but
How
as
he
a
was
person.
As a person, Le Corbusier.
Yes.
It's very difficult to explain, for sure. Just to say one thing, I said one day to him, I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, you are like a lion. And you know, a lion has a beautiful face, no? A lion is fantastic. I would never touch you, I said. I would be afraid to touch you. He was an undescribable person. He was very consequent. He never lost 1 minute without talking something else. Each minute, one day I came after many years, we had lunch every 2 weeks, and one day I bought a dog, an English setter, by the way, an English setter. And I was so happy that I had this dog, so I told him on the lunch, I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, I have a dog, and it's a fantastic dog, an English setter, she's fantastic, lovely. So he said, okay, let's talk, it's very nice animals, but let's talk serious thing. That's the only ones I was out of not talking serious, each minute. Each minute you had to be present, you know, he had no time to lose with me. That's why most of his collaborators, I think, they were not always present. How do you say? You have to concentrate each minute what he asks you. You have to have the right answer. He had no time to lose. That was the hard work to work with him, but otherwise he was a very fantastic, lovely person, friend, very, very humble, very nice in talking and being, sure. Okay.
When he died, obviously the museum wasn't finished. It was actually only just in the beginning. So how did you pursue, and were there any difficulties in actually bringing it to a closure without him being there? Or maybe other way around, maybe it was easier. I don't know.
No,
That's not a facetious question, but I believe
Sure.
that can happen as well.
No, it was certainly it was a big fight. It was very difficult. I engaged, I think, 3 lawyers during the finishing the 2 years. I needed 3 lawyers to fight that we keep his design right, that we execute it like he wanted. Because unfortunately his collaborator, this one said, you know, he's old, he didn't know what he did anymore, he was not anymore present to do this work like that. And so I said, but listen, we have time, you have time to prove that you are better, but don't change nothing. You know what I mean? They wanted to change, that they could say that's our work, we changed. So that was a real fight, I must say. That was not so nice after. Do not see the people very loyal to him, you know what I mean? It was a few very important details would be changed. So they said after the inauguration, they said it's the best executed building by Corbusier. But I had to be there every day on the construction. Every day I was there. That's for sure.
This is the only construction which is finished after his death, because when Le Corbusier death, there is many other projects, like Germany, for example, India, and the foundation, the Corbusier Foundation, is not built. It is in elaboration. And when he did, all projects were stopped. This is only project. It's thanks to Mrs. Weber that the museum continues, you know, and she fight a long time and very much, because he died in 67 in August, and 65, excuse me, 65, the 67, it's the opening of the museum. And there is a stop for few months between 65 on August to February 66. You know, this is the only 2-3 months, and after, because she wants to finish, and it's the only construction which is finished after the death. And the others, for example, Germany, we have waited for near 20 years. They finished now the last project of, and like the project of Strasbourg too also. So she has fighting a long time, but she has won.
And one thing I always said, Corbusier was always behind me. I was sure, because many times we had problems of the constructions which they said it's not possible to solve. And I don't know from where I got always the idea how to solve the problem. Unbelievable. They said, let's say, it's wrong to build 22,000 bolts to build a house like a Meccano. And we cannot do it. It's much cheaper. They wanted to change that. They wanted to suit them. And they said it's much cheaper without the bolts to suit them. So I said, okay, but we have to do what Corbusier left. We can change nothing. We are not allowed to change one little detail. So it was.
There is a funny story about the balls when the engineer Fruté said to Le Corbusier, but Mr. Le Corbusier, there is many balls, 22,000. It's very much. Do you think that we will continue and we follow? And Le Corbusier answered, oh, there is no matter. You can paint it in white, like this. We see them. Yes, it's difficult with the...
One more question, but just out of curiosity, this was supposed to be a villa museum. Who was supposed to live there? To live?
Again,
No, nobody. It's just for the exposition, you know. It's a manifest because it's the first time that with Mrs. Weber's proposition, he can build something to expose his idea, you know. And he wants to expose the apartment villa like he does in Paris, for example, but there is a human who live. But for the proposition of Zurich, it's just for exhibition.
I have one important anecdote that I think you know. Le Corbusier first he made the project in concrete, and then he came and said, Mrs. Weber, 2 months later said, oh, we changed, we would like to do it in steel. I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, I like a lot the steel, but because that's the future. Okay, and then he came back again and he said, oh, Mrs. Weber, we went back to the concrete because you don't know what you risk. The steel is more difficult and more risky, the costs, you know. So I looked to him and I said, Mr. Le Corbusier, I am very conscient that anyway I risk everything with you, so let it do in steel. And he was happy, he was smiling, very happy that I wanted to risk everything. And it would not be in steel, and that would be very damaged. No, it's fantastic, the steel. That's the future, not the concrete. Anyway, that's a very important moment, I think. And I answered him that, yeah. Okay.
One last question. It's difficult, but I always think about this. So, you're a gallerist. You looked after his work, most of his work. You still are. You know where they are. I don't. And then you ask him to make a building for his art, and then he dies, and then you fight to finish it. And then what do you do? What's the first show that you put on? How do you, I mean, did you curate a show just with his work, and does that change constantly, or are they fixed now? Do you have a feeling that some of the sculptures have to stay there? I mean, obviously one of the panel doors has his drawing, and then there's a sculpture of the modulo and so forth. So I think it's quite difficult for architects to relate to the art of the architect. I mean, of course, we all have this love affair between, you know, being an artist, being an architect, and it's also slightly frowned upon. Some people laugh about it and think it's not serious, or it's very serious, I don't know. So in a sense, this building and actually the material that exists for it, so the oeuvre of all these sculptures and paintings, in a way, I want you to talk a little bit about how do you place them? How do they inhabit it? Because in a way you said who lives in that building, or who is it made for? There's a kitchen, but nobody uses the kitchen. So it's a, yeah, can you say something about that relationship between the actual pieces and the space?
I think the most important thing is that you have this Gesamtkunstwerk. It's the unity of architecture, painting, sculptures, the universal artist. And that's, I think, it's the only one in the world, because let's say Mies van der Rohe was not a painter, not a writer, Picasso was not an architect, and all these great other artists, they were not universal. And that's what's about the whole house, it's to show the universality of Le Corbusier. The scientists, they are, how do you say, the whole. And that's what I think, it's in the harmony, in the proportion of the steel, because the 3 millimeter of the construction of the steel angles, they show 99% the harmony of the 226 of the modular, which is so fantastic, so genial, that people, when they come in the museum, they start to be happy, to feel, and you know what I mean? They feel the proportion, the harmony of all of the form of architecture, of paintings, of all. And that's what I think it's important. And one thing I can say, it's about the paintings. Before I met Corbusier, I exchanged a little collage and wear a car, and wear a Topolino. I had a Topolino. And the man who owned the Topolino, he don't want to give me, to sell me his collage. So one day he came and we went, he said, let's have lunch on the country. You have a car? So, okay, we went with my Topolino. And then he said, it's nice, a car, it's nice, you are freer. I said, but you have money, you can afford a car, no? He said, no, I have no money at all. I said, but you have the collage at home. And he knew that I knew that he paid 200 francs for the collage. And my Topolino at that time was 3,500. So I said, I gave you the car. He said, but you are crazy, you know, how much I paid. I said, no matter what you paid, I give you the car, let's go home. I give you my collage, no, you give me the collage, and I give you my car. So let's go home. And he gave me the collage. I went home with the train, and I left him the car. And 2 months later he came and he said, oh, you know, I don't know how to drive and I will never learn to drive. I said, do what you want, I don't give you back my collage. And then unbelievable situation when first I went to the Rue de Sèvres to Corbusier. In his atelier, at the end of the corridor, was the collage I bought, was the wall painting. It's unbelievable, no? And then he gave me, when I met him in Cap Martin, he offered me, and first of all, I had a little booklet, and it was etching the woman, which I have later also in my book. And that gave me so emotional. I wanted to have this etching. I wanted to have this copper etching. And then a friend said, oh, Corbusier, you can see, I wouldn't like to meet Corbusier. I want to have this kind of painting from him. And then, when I met him after I left, he offered me, he said, here I have a little present for you. It was that etching, which was in the little book. And he made a donation, he made, how do you say, dedication. Yeah, unbelievable. So that's something really was inexplicable things happen, no? No.
Well, I would like to thank you so much for coming, both of you, Naïma Jornod, for talking to us. I know you're not an architect and you're not doing lectures. You're a vascular surgeon, actually, but you're passionate about Corbusier. And also for Heidi Weber to come here tonight to share this with us. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.